Good afternoon and welcome to our session around building components for the Lightning App Builder. I'm Adeep Varadarajan. I'm a lead engineer on the Lightning App Builder team.
And I'm Brian McNamara. I'm a senior engineer on the Lightning App Builder team. So you all seen this, the forward-looking statement. We have some cool things in show for you today, so just keep that in mind when making your purchasing decisions.
So over the course of this session, we want to sort of go over some of the common mistakes that you could potentially make when building components and exposing them to Lightning app pages, how you can sort of fix those, and also a few tips and tricks on making your component very usable in the app builder. But before we sort of get into that, we would like to give a brief introduction on what Lightning pages are, or Flexi pages as you might know them, since that's what it's called in the API, and how the Lightning app builder fits into all of this. So for those of you who have made the transition to Lightning experience, this screen is probably pretty familiar. This is what we call a record detail page. And the important point to note here is that it is powered by a Lightning page. And Lightning pages are essentially the metadata that makes different screens in Lightning experience customizable. So there's other pages, such as home pages, or you could build app pages that sort of are customizable pages and sort of power different parts of Lightning experience. And we do plan on adding more pages to this list, so you should look forward to that. Now, a little bit into how Lightning pages work. Each page is associated with what we call a template. And a template has two main responsibilities. The first of which is it sort of defines a set of regions on the page. I'll dive a little into regions in a bit, but for example, this page has a template that's defined 4 regions. The header, subhead, body, and the sidebar. The second responsibility of a template is to sort of define the placement of these regions. So again, this template sort of decided that the header should show up at the top, the subhead below that, and then the body and sidebar in a 2-column layout. Now, if we go into regions, each region is sort of basically a place on the page where you can add components. If we jump back to this page, this is how the different components in the standard experience are sort of fit into the different regions. So you have the highlights panel that's in the header region, the sales path in the subhead, and so on and so forth. It was important for us to sort of lay all of this down this way because it helps us define the structure of a page in a way that is understandable by the different tools. And this has essentially let us build rich editing experiences such as the app builder, which is capable of editing these experiences. So you take any page in Lightning experience that is defined as a Lightning page, you can open it up in the app builder, move components around, save it, and you've customized the experience for your org. And in addition to just letting you move components around, we also give you a bunch of out-of-the-box components that we think you might find useful when you customize the page. But we understand we can't possibly cover all the use cases that are out there. Like, there are developers, ISVs that are building really cool pages, really cool apps, and we just can't keep up. Which is why we've made it super easy for you to take any Lightning component that you have and expose it in the app builder. And exposing it is as easy as sort of getting your component to implement an interface. So, for example, if you have a component that you think is ready to be exposed for all sorts of Lightning pages, you implement Flexi page available for all page types, and it's available for all the Lightning pages in your org. If you think it's it doesn't really make sense in all use cases, it's only sort of makes sense for a limited set of contexts, such as record pages or home pages, we've got separate interfaces for that. But we've been going through slides a bunch. Let's switch over to a quick demo. Say you've got this really cool Lightning component built out. It sort of takes in the ID of an event, sort of renders a countdown to that event, and a whole bunch of users in your org are at Dreamforce, and you think this might be really useful in the home page. So you take this component, you've tested it out really well by itself, you're super happy with how it works, you're ready to sort of expose it for usage in other pages. So you go to the dev console, and this is where you've sort of developed your component. You see it doesn't implement any of the interfaces we talked about, which is fine. You'll just add one of those interfaces, get it to implement that. We save it, and then we jump back into the app builder. You'll notice to start with, the component doesn't show up in that list because, well, it didn't implement that interface. But now that we've added it, we refresh the palette, and it should show up as soon as it loads. There it is. So it's as easy as that. You get your component to implement an interface, and it'll just show up magically in the app builder. So let's go ahead and drag it onto the page. Set the event that we're interested in. OK. So it seemed to work fine when we sort of tested it by itself. But when we added it to a page, it looks like it broke the layout. So there's obviously something wrong in what we did. Probably the styling. Let's go take a look at what's wrong over there. And there, that's the part that's causing it to break. The width, we're hard-coding a width of 1,700 pixels, which is sort of breaking the layout. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the template's responsibility to sort of lay out the page, lay out the different regions. You don't want your component to sort of break out of those confines. You want it to take up 100% of the width available, not any less, not any more, because it's just not going to play well with the rest of the system. So let's remove that. That should cause it to take up 100% of the width. Save, go back. And when we refresh Canvas, it now fits in nicely into that region. It's not breaking the layout, not interfering with the rest of the page. It's sort of it's nice and clean over there. So that's something to keep in mind. And while we're at that, let's switch to some guidelines that we've put in place that we recommend you follow when building your components. So the first one is the width. This is what we just ran into, in that the component was trying to take up a lot more width than was really available to it. So when building your components, just keep in mind that the template is going to tell you how much space is available. So just try to take up 100% of the width available. Don't try nothing less, nothing more. Try to stay clear of absolute values because, well, it's not going to work, in responsive cases. And so something to keep in mind. The next is spacing. So it's possible that when an app builder user is configuring a page, they've got components coming in from different sources. You have some that are coming in from Salesforce, some that are, some custom components that you've built in your org, and some that you'd probably install from packages. Now, we understand that it's difficult for you to sort of anticipate what the other components are going to be. So we decided that we'd have the framework take care of spacing around the component. So the system sort of adds consistent spacing between components, but that's going to break if you add spacing around your components. Say, we as a framework sort of add about, I think it's 10 or 12 pixels of spacing. If you add about 20 pixels of spacing, there's going to be a lot of white space. So that, again, is something you want to avoid when building components. Paddings around the root element are fine. You'll get a lot of white space, but you won't increase the effective height or width of your components, or won't break the layout. But if you add margins, this is where it breaks the layout, because margins will increase the effective width of your component. And it's then going to go back to the use case that we just saw, the example we saw where it was just expanding outside the region. So something to avoid if possible. And the last bit is removing elements from the document flow. So this refers mainly to rules such as floats and position absolutes. By using these rules, you are effectively taking either the whole component or parts of the component away from the position it's supposed to render in. This, again, breaks the layout. So this, again, is something that you want to avoid in almost all cases. That's all I had around styles. Brian's going to continue now.
So now that we have a nicely styled component exposed to the app builder, there's a few things you get with that framework. Is you get the ability to make it customizable to your customers. This allows a huge ability to make this component exactly what it should be and make it customizable to that org. So first, we're going to take a look at what makes up a component. So as some of you know, there's 8 parts to the component. There's a component markup, the 3 JavaScript controller, helper, and renderer, the style, the design, SVG, and documentation parts of the bundle. We're going to focus on 2 to make this component highly customizable in the app builder, and those are the design and the SVG. So let's go a little bit more into the design file real quick. The design file is what allows our system to determine what you as a developer want exposed to your customer. It allows you to expose attributes to be customized, as well as some other validation that we'll get into a little bit later. So quickly, let's go back to the app builder and take a look at this component and see what we can do to make this look a little cleaner. So over here is where our component is. As you can see, the name of the component is there, and the default SVG is provided. But using the design file, we can customize this and provide a better label to our customer. So let's go ahead and jump back to the developer console and do that real quick. So over here, we'll find the design definition over here. And by simply adding a label to the root element of the design, we will tell our system to use this label instead of the component's name. So just like that, we'll save it, jump back to the app builder, and refresh, and we'll see instantly that now our component has a nice label, event countdown. That's a lot better. It's readable, and I understand what it does. So the next thing that you see is slightly different is that icon over there. So all the standard components that we ship, we provide a unique SVG. It makes it really easy for your customer to find your component using a nice graphical image such as the SVG. So we can go ahead and add that. We can make ours a little more stand out by adding this custom SVG. So once again, we'll go back to the developer console, and you'll see the SVG right alongside the design. So by clicking that, we create the default. The default is what you have already seen, the nice lightning bolt. But we have something a little better. We got a SVG from our designer that makes the component a little more easy to identify. So we'll simply paste it in there, save it, and once again refresh. And we'll see now the component looks just like the rest of the standard components. It has a nice SVG, and it has a label. So let's go ahead and drag this on one more time and just see how it's looking. So let's draw your attention over to the right-hand side over here, where we have this attribute, event ID. So that's another thing that we can customize, is making these attributes a little more human readable by providing a label and description. So let's see what we can do to fix that. So yeah, we'll go back to the developer console and go back to the design file, where we're going to add a design attribute. This attribute allows us to link up the attribute we defined in the component and tells our system that you want it to be configured, and provides a label and description that our system will use in the property editor. So just like that, we'll save it, go back to the app builder, and we'll just click off and click back on to refresh the property. And you'll now see that we have the label as well as an informational bubble over on the right that provides a description to the user. So one thing to note over here is this is a string editor. So we need to pass an event ID. And that's not the most user-friendly way of doing things. You have to go outside, find the event that you're interested in, copy the ID, and paste it in there. That's not the easiest way to customize in the same context. The options that we currently have is to provide a static set of data source in the design file. That allows you to provide a list of options to display in a pick list. But when it comes to an event ID, that's not going to be the same ID in a different org. So if you package up your component and ship it to somebody else, it's not going to work. So that's kind of been a restriction that we've had that we've actually been working on to fix. So what we're about to show you is something that we've been working on internally. We're hoping to release it to you guys really soon because we know the potential it can give you guys into the customization of your component. And that is to provide a dynamic data source. That is, you can now create an Apex class to provide a list of options in a pick list. So in this case, we'll simply add this data source and link it up to this event data source Apex class. And just to whet your appetite a little bit, let's go ahead and take a look at that source. So here we have the Apex class that we implemented. It has 3 methods that we overrode. Let's draw your attention to this getValues. This is kind of the meat of this Apex class. This getValues method is simply going through your events and pulling the ID and the subject from that. It is then creating a list of rows in the pick list, passing in the subject as the name and the ID as a value. The next one is get default value. This will allow your component to be dragged on, and the default value will be passed into it, allowing it to render initially. As you can see here, it's pretty simple. It just uses the get values and returns the first one. So fairly simple. So with that, we can jump back to the app builder. Now, since this is currently in development, we'll have to refresh the page for this to pick up the changes. But just like that, we can then drag the component back onto the page, and you'll see that the attribute has been transformed into a pick list, and our component renders after it's been dragged on. So now if we drop down, you can now see that it's dynamically generating the list of options for your user. No more will you have to statically code a list of options in it. You can provide it using an Apex data source. We think this will provide a huge amount of customization, and we're really excited to get this out to you as soon as we can. So with that, let's jump back to the slides and just kind of go overview. So what we just talked about is the design attribute. This is what tells our system to allow your attribute to be edited. You set the label and description on it, as well as some other things such as a default and some basic validation that we have for integers. And one thing that we didn't tell you guys is it's not really this doesn't apply to our component because we want it exposed for everything, but say you have a component that is primarily used on an opportunity page. You code it so that it expects the fields of an opportunity. You can now define which objects your component should show up under using the SFDC objects tag. This, again, is defined right alongside inside the design file and allows you to restrict your component to those objects defined. So I kind of want to go back and have you guys think about the future of your component. For those of you who are planning on releasing your component, we want you to excel for the lifetime of your component. We want to make sure that your component will always work regardless of the new features that you put on it. With that being said, our system does do a lot of validation. We prevent you from doing a lot of things that will actually break your component once you upgrade it. But it's always helpful to make sure that you are aware of these type of issues, such as adding a new required attribute. Existing pages will not have that required attribute, so they will not be passed in, and your component will probably break. With that being said, you should also make sure that your component is flexible in the sense that you should expect random values being passed into those attributes. Make them be able to handle it gracefully so that you can expect your component to always work. So yeah, think about your design before you begin. With that, we are excited to say that your component will have a happy lifetime. And so kind of just again, some things that we're excited to provide you guys with. We demoed today a dynamic pick list. There's some also additional things that we're looking forward to giving you guys. The additional supported data types. This is one big thing that we have heard. We currently support 3 data types in the app builder. We want to expand that so you guys can customize to whatever you need. Another one is something that you might have seen in additional standard components, and that is informational components in the property editor. This will help provide your customers with a little bit of information in the property editor about your component. The rest are dependent pick list attributes and visibility. Again, this is going to be focused all around the property editor and how you can help your customers expose or customize your component.
So to sort of summarize what we just went through, first, when you're thinking about releasing your component, when you're sort of trying to make it available for use in Lightning Pages and Lightning App Builder, the first thing you want to sort of make sure you handle is, or sort of think about is, are all the styling guidelines that I just mentioned. You want to make sure your component plays well with the rest of the system. It could be used in a variety of different pages, which may or may not be in your org, especially if you're packaging. So definitely think about that. The next was what Brian covered around the editing experience of your component. You want to make sure that the users of the app builder who are going to be dragging your component on and sort of configuring its attributes, they understand your component. They know what each attribute does, how sort of changing the values for each will sort of affect the component. So make sure you give nice labels for your attributes, nice descriptions. That's really going to help your, the admins that use the app builder. And lastly, future-proofing your component. We do a bunch of validation, but you want to make sure that you think ahead, think through how you design your component. You don't paint yourself in the corner if you want to do upgrades in the future, and so on. And that's all we had. We hope that you enjoyed the session. Hopefully this was useful. Brian and I will sort of hang out here for the next 15, 20 minutes. In case you've got questions, feel free to grab us, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And it's just the first day of Dreamforce. We have a few more really cool sessions that are going to happen over the next few days. Do check them out. They're super useful, especially if you're going to deal a lot with Lightning Pages and the app builder. Thank you.
And one other note before you all leave. This week is Fleet Week. And if you're all interested in helping out and writing a letter to our troops, they have a booth right over here. If you have a spare minute, swing by, write a letter. It would really help. So, thank you.